So to close out our closing keynote, we have Ellyn Winters-Robinson. Ellyn Winters-Robinson is a best-selling author of Flat Please and is an advocate, spends a lot of time at the Accelerator Center at the University of Waterloo as well, helping people navigate their entrepreneurial challenges as well. And so we're so pleased that Ellyn joined us and was willing to join us for Blend today. So please join me in welcoming Ellyn. Thanks so much.
I've been furiously looking at my notes, but I think I'm good. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very proud to be here. I feel very deeply connected to the Stratford School. I have, no, it's the mic. Oh, there it is. Awesome. Thank you. I feel deeply connected to the school. As Greg mentioned, I am a mentor at the Waterloo Accelerator Center. We actually at one point had a little outpost here in Stratford, and so I got to work with the students in the early years of the program. And I actually sit on the professional advisory group for the school, so it's great to be here. I am here to, so I want to preface, I am not a product designer. I am the mother of a product designer. But what I am here to talk to you about today is a journey that I've taken over the last 4 years that has gone from a cancer diagnosis, breast cancer diagnosis, through to a product solution that I didn't know I was going to build, through to the creation of a global movement. And I just want to leave you with a thought that really anyone, if they just do it, can affect change in the world on a global scale. Okay? So this isn't a healthcare talk. This is a talk about designing for the nervous system. So how do we create a product for people when they're at their absolute worst? So 4 years ago and 3 days from now, I received a voicemail from my family practitioner telling me that I had cancer. And it was devastating, obviously. It was probably one of the most traumatic things I've ever gone through in my life. I certainly didn't think that I would be, standing here today doing what I'm doing, but I was scared out of my mind. In the first 4 weeks between, hearing this news and seeing a surgeon and going for a biopsy, I lost 10 pounds in that time period. And, pretty much the only thing I could do was curl up on the couch and watch 6 seasons of Schitt's Creek. Honest to God, if I ever meet Dan Levy, I'm like, the man saved my life. So I learned that I didn't feel everything I was feeling, this loneliness, this disconnection, this bewilderment, this abject fear. I was not alone in this. That most people who go through some kind of a life-threatening diagnosis feel the same. This is a quote from another woman. I don't even know who she was, but she posted it on Facebook. And this is really how people feel when they get diagnosed. They feel alone. They feel like they're being ordered around. It's not like when the doctors call to give you an appointment for a scan or for your first on chemotherapy that you're pulling out your date book and saying, well, let me see if I'm available on this particular day. It is absolutely physically and mentally exhausting to go through this. So I'm going to take you in. We talked a little bit about, or some of the other speakers have talked about cognitive psychology. I want to talk to you about what happens when you go through one of these basically system crashes. You go into what they call cognitive load overload. So cognitive load theory is really about mental effort, information processing, your working memory, your capacity, and then simplification of what you've just heard. Okay, so that's how we all process information in our little computers that are up inside our noggin. Now, when you go into cognitive overload, you simply can't think anymore. So there's actually a chemical response that happens in the brain when you go into a trauma situation, and it's called the amygdala. It's a gland that actually produces essentially, this feeling that you need to either freeze or fly. And what's happening is it's the most primal part of your brain. It's actually, this is stuff that's happening right in your brain stem. And it is completely beyond your control. It's an actual physical reaction. And so it's important that we understand that because, you know, when you hear that you have had a cancer diagnosis, you immediately go into that fright and flight mode and you freeze. So you're not thinking clearly, you're not hearing. I mean, I would sit in appointments and it was like, you're all too young. Charlie Brown, the teacher in Charlie Brown would go womp, 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 womp. And that's really what you were hearing. I used to have to record the conversations I was having with my surgeon because I could not remember. And the thing is, your other family members who are there to support you, in theory, are also now on a trauma bus. So they are also going through this same, you know, crazy journey and, you know, can't even be trusted to hear the right things themselves. So that's just to kind of explain, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what happened after that. So I didn't set out to write a product. I didn't set out to create a product by any means. I just knew that I was getting really good information from others that had been on a cancer journey. So I spoke with a lot of women who had breast cancer because I was trying to gather wisdom from them. The doctors, when they see you, they're really fixated on treating the disease, cutting the disease out, poisoning the disease, that's it. And the amount of time that you have with these doctors is very small. And each of these moments are just like a transaction, you know, really, unfortunately, that's the way it works. So I thought, I need to help somehow. If I'm feeling this way, other people are feeling this way. So I decided to start documenting, because I'm a storyteller, I've been a writer all my life. And so I thought, I'm going to write a book. And that's what I did. So I wrote this book called Flat Please, Hold the Shame. You can get it on Amazon. I've got some copies here if anybody wants one. And the idea was really to hand over to this next person that was going through this some wisdom. And I told it in the first person. So it was very much the mental journey that I was on in that moment. And it was very much through the moments that I was in. So I had this book, it was sitting in manuscript form, and you know, when you're working in the tech world, we like to talk about collisions, these happy moments when you come together. So the book's in manuscript form. I was still in treatment during October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, sort of the logical time to publish a book. So I thought maybe I'll do it at Mother's Day, I don't know. I ended up on a call with the Accelerator Center, and there was a guy on the call. I'd never met him before, and at this point, my hair is regrowing. I've been through chemotherapy. I think I was in my Barack Obama phase of regrowth. And this fellow started asking me all these questions. And just to get the call back in order, I said, look, dude, I'll send you my manuscript if you're interested. Unbeknownst to me, ChatGPT had just come out. I didn't even know anything about AI. I'm now like a huge fan, but I knew nothing about AI at this point. And he said, you know what? The way you've told this book, let's just experiment. I wonder if we could create a digital version of you. So he took my manuscript, he read it, and then he went into like a fever dream and just basically started working at 3 o'clock in the morning on this, and his wife was like, what the heck are you doing? And within 3 weeks, he had produced the first version of Ask Ellyn. And I remember sending some of the responses we were getting back to my daughter-in-law. And she said, oh my God, I feel like I'm talking to you. So that's where things started. So I want to talk a little bit about the design principles behind Ask Ellyn, and then I'm going to get into the design layers. So there were some very strict rules when we created Ask Ellyn that we had agreed upon. So I didn't build it. I'm not a technologist, I'm not a product builder, but it's my personality. And so we spent a lot of time dialing in, looking at the responses that she was generating, making sure that it was true and authentic to my voice, that it was saying things in the way I would say them. And we test it against something like a ChatGPT to see what the responses were like. For example, I was incredibly scared that I would not get my hair back, that it would not grow back. Now, if you ask ChatGPT a question, say, look, I'm scared I'm going to lose my hair, it'd say, it's just hair, it'll grow back. I would never say something like that. So that was just an example of what we were trying to do. The other thing is we had some very firm design principles that we honor today. So first, she is non-medical. The creators of Ask Ellyn literally almost killed themselves to make sure that she would never say, yes, you could take an aspirin. It's I took an aspirin, but you should go talk to your care team. So you can ask her medical questions, but she will always only answer with my lived experience, and then she'll always recommend that you go back to your care team. Because I was a good patient, and I didn't want Ask Ellyn to be interfering in any way with the clinical workflows and the clinical care that people were receiving. So that was one, non-medical. The other agreement was it was privacy by design. So we knew we were dealing with a vulnerable population. We knew we were dealing with a patient population. There's HIPAA and PHIPAA and all these different regulations. So we chose, in the open version of Ask Ellyn, to make her completely data-free. So we collect no data. There is no registration to use her. We even use AI to anonymize. So we do retain the questions that people are asking, but we anonymize with AI and rephrase the questions so that we get the gist of what somebody's saying, but there's no personal information that's put together. So that's the other design principle that we put in place. So the privacy, so non-medical and private. The other is that we made a strong commitment to each other, the team that built her and myself, that she would always be free. So that no patient, no caregiver would ever pay to use Ask Ellyn. That had a huge ick factor. It also made it a little bit of an interesting thing to try and build a business around this, but we're figuring that out. So those were some very clear design principles. Now, most of you are probably familiar with agentic AI now. You've probably interacted with a chat bot for some kind of service. So how is Ask Ellyn different from an AI agent that maybe is built on top of ChatGPT? The real difference here, the nuance, is that she incorporates my lived experience. So it's my emotions, my story. She knows my family. In fact, funny story, not funny. We had to put our cat down last week. It's okay. He was 18. He had a really good run. He was a legend. Somebody, one of my groupies, one of my followers, went to Ask Ellyn and expressed their condolences about her losing Steve. And she answered incredibly appropriately. It was very funny to me. So that lived experience is what really makes it, that is the nuance of difference here. And I felt, given that we're in this really pioneering place, this is, as far as I know, the only chatbot that embeds lived experience, that it was important that people knew that there was a real woman behind it as well. Maybe in time we'll get to a place of AI companions that will be more synthetic and not be a real person. But if you ask Ellyn if she's real, they're like, oh yeah, she's a real lady, and she'll tell you my age, and tell you where you can find me on Instagram. So that human, there's a human behind this, I think is still very important in this sort of early stages of AI. So let's talk a little bit about the empathy and design layers that we've created. So I'm going into cognitive psychology here. So this as I started building this presentation, I was so excited because this is just so freaking cool. So one of the things, again, when you're in information overload and you're in fright and flight mode and you're not hearing clearly, one of the things is to go one level simpler. So when someone is asking a question of Ask Ellyn, she will reply in a more simplistic, clear way. So, when I was diagnosed, I remember, and I say this all the time, I felt like suddenly I had woken up in Cancer University. People are throwing terminology at you that you have never heard before. There's acronyms. The doctors know what they're saying. They're talking about procedures and this and that. You're reading pathology reports and biopsy reports, and you're just immersed in this new language in this new world. It's kind of cool actually now, like in the breast cancer world, because there's like different types of breast cancer. It's all like we kind of like introduce ourselves by our call letters. It's like, hi, I'm Ellyn. I'm ER/PR positive, HER2 negative. I had IDC. It's just really strange that we use this terminology. It's kind of like the tech world in some ways, like we got all these jargon. So this idea of going one level simpler so that someone that is in cognitive overload can digest the information and can understand what's happening to them or understand the answer. So the other layer is a validation before information. So most agentic AI that's being built for healthcare is really built for a person that's in treatment, and it's really to help them navigate the medical diagnosis and all those other terminology things. But we decided that that was information that was well covered off. There was already an overload of information. Everybody that's been diagnosed with cancer carries around a binder, like, because they give you so much information. Again, you're in cancer university, so you get a binder. When I was going into chemotherapy, they gave me a list of side effects that was about this thick, that you're supposed to absorb and digest all this information and know when you should be calling the doctor or when you shouldn't be. And so it's important, and it was important in Ask Ellyn's design, to make sure that we were empathetically matching with that individual exactly where they were on the journey. So it would have been weird, for example, if somebody said, "Yay, I just finished chemotherapy," and Ask Ellyn be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you got cancer." There was no empathy match. So one of the things that her brain does when someone asks a question is it senses what emotion they're expressing. So if they're scared, she will acknowledge the fact that they're frightened. If they're angry, she'll acknowledge that and then respond accordingly. And her responses will always lead with that empathetic match. Then she will actually go into, and Greg and I were talking about this earlier, storytelling and Freiberg's principle. So she'll always then start to relate to my experience and my story as told in my book. And then she'll always end on a supportive note, okay? So that validation before information, because if you're just giving information, you're missing the whole human in the connection. The third layer is perspective modeling, which is essentially understanding who is asking the question. So one of the things that I think is really cool about Ask Ellyn is that she's not just for the patient. She's there for the caregiver as well. And so we've actually had friends go to Ask Ellyn and get her advice to curate a gift basket for another friend that had been diagnosed. And she did such a great job that everybody was in tears. So this is the beautiful thing about her. In fact, if you go to her and you ask her a question in the voice of a child, like, "Why is mommy bald?" she will give you language to actually speak to that child and to be able to explain this in terms that a child would understand. So the ability for her to perspective shift is really cool. And it makes her very multifaceted, okay? So the fourth layer is tone synchronicity. So understanding, again, what emotions are being expressed and being able to model and to adjust to that. One of the rules that we created, one of the guardrails we have for Ask Ellyn, is that she is always dignified in her responses. And so it's amazing what just that language does, because you can literally go and say the most foul, angry things, believe me, we have in testing her. And she will always gently tell you that you're being an asshole, but without actually getting angry. So I always kind of joke and say that we built a much better version of me, and she doesn't swear as much as I do, by the way. So the final layer is safe harbor, and this goes back to the privacy by design. One of the things that I've learned in my cancer journey, I did a photography project with an amazing photographer where we photographed 31 individuals, all who had been impacted by breast cancer, and we wanted to make the most inclusive photo essay that we've ever seen. So we included every race, every culture, every age group from the age of 23. Young ladies in the audience, please know your bodies. From the age of 23 to the age of 73, we included males and trans males who had had breast cancer as well. And that gave me the opportunity to have a lot of conversations with others who were from different cultures and different cultural backgrounds. And what I learned, I mean, even in Western culture, there's still this weirdness about breast cancer. People don't like to talk about body parts, and they don't like to admit that they've had cancer. But in other cultures, breast cancer diagnosis can be an extremely shameful thing. And it can be something that an individual may not even be able to speak to their own family about. And it hit home with me. I had a colleague at the Accelerator Center who's Bengali, and he came and he said, my aunt was diagnosed with breast cancer. Can I share Ask Ellyn with her? And I said, yes. And by the way, she speaks every language. Like, people come up to me and they go, hey, she speaks perfect Bulgarian. I'm like, Good, I don't. So he said, can I share this with my aunt? She said she was diagnosed, and she finally had to sort of come out that she'd been diagnosed because she was going into surgery and she needed her brother to come and help her. And her brother's reaction was, please we do not talk of this. Like, this is not something that we speak of. And so I've learned that is a common thing in Southeast Asian. There's actually Stanford literature that says, Southeast Asian women, because they do not do the self-checks because of cultural, barriers, that they're often diagnosed with breast cancer at a much later stage. So these exist. So when I realized that Ask Ellyn spoke every language, and there was this moment where I thought, my God, I might be the only friend that this woman may have, that only confidant that they're going to be able to speak with. So the other thing is that people get angry. Like, a cancer diagnosis is an absolutely traumatic event. And God knows that we as a family had all kinds of turmoil about it. Because, when you go through a trauma, what happens is you go back to, sort of your early kind of imprint, your psychological imprint that happens like when you're 6 months old and you don't have any control over that in terms of how you're going to react to things. And so, all these primal feelings start to come to the surface, and everybody's going through stages of grief, and they're, get at different stages, and everybody's moving in different places. And so this idea that you've got a safe place to go to, everyone has a safe place to go to, where they'll keep your secrets. I said, she's like the Catholic priest, but there's no priest on the other side of the door. And so, to know, and I think this is really important for the men folk who don't know often how to support their family member, and to be able to go and say whatever you need to say and get some coaching. I think at the end of the day, better caregivers make for better patients and better patient outcomes. And so if everybody is learning together, then we have this ability to do it safely and without any judgment. So she doesn't judge. So, I didn't know 4 years ago and 3 days from today that I was going to move from a diagnosis to a product to a movement. And that's a picture. I know it's usually you see pictures of people getting their head shaved, and it's like really sad, and I'm like grinning like a banshee. By the way, the young man shaving my head is in the back of the room, my son. He was there for me in that moment and shaved his own head as well. So yeah, so it was actually not a bad day. So I had no idea that this is what we were going to be building. There was no intention to this. But it's turned out to be pretty cool. When you're designing for suffering, it requires courage. So I had to be courageous enough to want to share my story and to want to put it down on words. And then to stand on the stage, and you probably notice I don't have boobs anymore. So, but I go through the world, courageously owning what has happened to me. To design for that, you need to understand. And it's funny because Goggins said that, he doesn't think AI does empathy yet. And I'm like, let's talk, buddy. So this designing for courage, it takes that vulnerability and that honesty to be able to share your story. But when you share your story, you create impact. I don't know if any of you know what the butterfly effect is, but this idea that just this one movement, this one gesture, suddenly has this multiplier effect. And that's what's starting to happen. So in just 2 years, I've gone from completing chemotherapy and to launching Ask Ellyn, and I'm going to show you what's happened since. So I always say that by the way, I had 5 wigs in honor of Moira Rose. That one, I think, was called Suzette. I always say that when I wrote the book and when we built Ask Ellyn, that I built the tool that I longed for. I just wanted someone to hold my hand. I wanted a hug. I didn't want to hear that it was going to be better or that I had this, because I didn't know if I had this. I didn't want to know anything. I just needed somebody to be there to speak to me without judgment. And so I always think that the Ask Ellyn that we built, I built for me and I built for my family. So Ask Ellyn is out there in the world. We launched her in October 2023, so she's now in her terrible 2s. She's actually slightly younger than my grandson, who's 3. She is available around the world. She's available in every language. She is free, as I've mentioned. She's now been used in over 100 countries, spoken to in 50+ languages. And all you digital product people in the world of TikTok, I'm very proud of this. She has a 70% digital engagement rate. People go to her and talk to her for up to 3 minutes at a time. So, pretty cool, yeah. And, you know, my mission was always that I wanted to create something so that no one diagnosed would ever walk alone. And I've been very, very fortunate. I've made some friends along the way. So GE Healthcare, I'll still remember this day. I was actually driving to see Graham and his wife, and I got this LinkedIn post, and it was from Dr. Ilya Gip, who's the chief medical officer at GE Healthcare. And he said, I don't get easily amazed, and I have just been amazed. I just talked to this thing called Ellyn, Ask Ellyn, and he talked to her in Russian. He's now on my medical advisory board, and he flew to Toronto. We did a global webinar together where, very weirdly, he interviewed me in a fireside chat, and then he interviewed Ask Ellyn. It was a really interesting test because our responses were actually incredibly close. They were almost identical. So that shows you how well they've dialed in her voice. So, you know, Ilya, and he's a really interesting when you talk about perspective. So he's a scientist, but he also had a mother who had breast cancer. And so he said he has actually talked to Ask Ellyn in very sciencey terms, and she will talk back to him in very sciencey terms. Or he will talk to her in, you know, sort of the voice of a child, like a son that, you know, went through this with his mother, and she will talk as if he's speaking. So he's already tested all those multi-layers and is fascinated by that. The other thing that has happened, there's an organization out of Geneva called City Cancer Challenge. They're a nonprofit organization. They're backed by all the big boys like the WHO and the World Bank and UN. And they have identified Ask Ellyn as one of 11 tools that they've declared to be a gold standard for patient navigation. The intention is that they want to work with cities in low to middle income countries to change the way cancer care is delivered in a more digital way. And I'll give you a really interesting sort of like mic drop moment. I was on a call with them, and there was a doctor on there from Nigeria, and she said, in Nigeria, there's 100 million people in Nigeria, and there's, I think, 100 oncologists. So when you start to look at, you know, digital tools like this are very much still a luxury here in the Western world, although they are still solving some pretty pressing problems. But when you start looking at low to middle income countries, digital tools are a necessity, you know. And, you know, shockingly, only 11% of women worldwide are diagnosed or screened for any type of cancer. So, and cancer levels are rising, so it's a problem. A year ago, just about a year ago, we were very, very fortunate to be, and all the researchers in the room are going to be very impressed with this. We received a $250,000 research grant from Canadian Cancer Society through a digital innovation fund. And we are working with Brock University and University of Waterloo. We have researchers, actually Marina Moutstakis from the Faculty of Health is on our research team. The School of Nursing is leading a national clinical evidence study. So they're in the midst of doing that. It's a mixed method survey. They're doing surveying and qualitative interviews. And so we actually are going to have clinical evidence data that AI companions in healthcare solve a very pressing need when it comes to psychosocial and emotional support. And because I was trying to figure out how to make this a business, we actually just completed our first licensing deal. So Ask Ellyn is now licensed to Cigna Healthcare in the United States. And so she's available. If you Google Cigna and Ask Ellyn, you'll find her there. I'm going to finish with a story. I'm going to tell you a story of Stacy. So Ask Ellyn's private. I don't know who's using her. Again, there's no registration or anything else. But we have a feedback mechanism, and I got this message from this woman through the feedback mechanism, and she said, I want to thank you for what you built. She said, I just had a mastectomy, and I was in the bathroom getting ready to take a shower for the first time. And I was going to take my bandages off and see what my scars look like. And she said, I used your AI. And she said, I learned we had a lot in common, that we were both kind of sporty. She knew I was a D cup. And she said, I want to thank you because you got me through that moment. And I remember what that felt like. That a moment of incredible vulnerability where you're seeing your body is now completely different and scarred. And I know that there's no doctor or no nurse that's going to be there with you in that moment. And often a family member is not going to be there with you. It's a very private moment. And the thought that I was able to digitally stand with her in that bathroom, in that moment, and get her through that, that's what keeps me going. And folks, that's what designing for humanity is all about. Thank you. Oh, I'm walking away with the clicker.
Ellyn, thank you so much for that journey. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your lived experience. Thank you for how you've translated into something that's helping people around the world, and seeing those stats are just mind-blowing too, seeing the impact it's having, hearing the story of Stacy and how it's actually having a real impact on people at key moments in their cancer journeys. Thank you for your story.